Okay, welcome on behalf of the Living Green Committee of Temple Beth Shalom, and thank you for coming tonight, especially since there's a presidential debate. So we'll try to get you home around 9 so you can watch that exciting event. We're going to start the evening with 4 short videos on why the labeling of GMO foods is important, and they come from California, where Proposition 37 is on the ballot for November 6th. And Proposition 37 will require labeling of GMO foods. This is the first state in the nation if it passes. So here are 4 short videos from California Prop 37 on why labeling of GMOs is important.
Doctors in all parts of the country were asked, what cigarette do you smoke, doctor? See how mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
DDT. Used right, it is absolutely harmless to humans and animals.
The herbicide will open up ground areas.
Big agrochemical corporations have produced genetically engineered corn that includes insecticides. Not on the corn, but in the corn. A new study links genetically engineered corn to tumors and organ damage. And the big agrochemical corporations also say Bt toxins are safe for us to eat. We shouldn't be forced to gamble with the health of our families. We have the right to know what's in our food. Vote yes on Proposition 37.
Because food is love. Food is life. Food is family. We all have the right to know what's in our food. That's why so many consumers say yes to Proposition 37. It gives us the right to know if there are genetically engineered ingredients in our food, with clear information on package labels. That's the very same right consumers in nearly 50 other countries already enjoy. Yes, on 37, we have the right to know what's in our food.
Americans get sick more often than Europeans and people in other industrialized countries, and they're getting sicker. Since the mid-90s, the number of Americans suffering from at least 3 chronic illnesses nearly doubled, and America's international ranking for infant mortality and lifespan also plunged. There are many reasons why this is taking place. One may be right in front of you.
They take genes from one species and force it into the DNA of other species. The very process of genetic engineering creates unpredicted side effects.
It does not exist anywhere in nature.
They can put it on the market without telling the FDA or consumers.
Every single cell within that plant is producing a toxic protein.
Bt is designed to break open the stomach of insects and kill them. The EPA got it wrong. It does break open little pores in human cells, and it might cause the same kind of disruption in our guts as it's causing in the insects that it kills.
How did my son get these food allergies? Our food supply is genetically modified. And guess what? The food that my son ate on August 25th, 2009 was raw corn. The corn that almost killed him.
We're continuing to feed our GMO contaminated food to our children.
The vast majority of genetically modified crops are engineered to make it easier for farmers to kill weeds. For example, Monsanto's Roundup Ready crops, which comprise most of today's GMOs, can survive applications of Monsanto's best-selling weed killer, Roundup.
Plants treated with Roundup have a reduction in available nutrients. They're weak and they're sick. The animals that eat the nutrient-deficient plants, they become nutrient deficient and weak and sick. Then we eat the animals and the plants that are nutrient deficient, and we may become weak and sick. In addition, the residues of the Roundup in the plant can end up in our bodies where they can chelate, hug some of the nutrients that are in our bodies, making them less available as well. Lab animals fed Roundup Ready soy have had serious reproductive disorders. In mice, the testicles changed, including damage to the young sperm cells. In rats, there was changes in the uterus and ovaries. The DNA functioned differently in the embryo offspring of mice. When female rats were fed genetically modified soy, more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks. The babies were also smaller and could not reproduce.
Children are particularly more sensitive to GMOs for several reasons than adults. Number one is they have higher metabolic rates. They metabolize food quicker. They need more food. And their cells are changing quicker. They are growing rapidly. So they have a higher cell turnover. They have higher metabolic rates, higher respiratory rates, so they require more nutrition. They eat more. And number two is that children are more sensitive to smaller doses of toxins than adults. We don't respond to toxins the same way.
Their immune system is not prepared for it.
Any gene changes that can be passed on to the baby can be passed on to future generations, and it's a new field of genetics called epigenetics, and that's what I'm worried about. I thought in the old genetic days we thought that genes weren't so mutable, and we now know that's not true.
When I first discovered that GMO was in infant formula and infant food, I was outraged.
We can't say for sure that GMOs have anything to do with autism, but we can't say for sure that it doesn't. In fact, there's been an increase in autism since GMOs were introduced, and animals that eat GMOs, both in laboratory and in livestock situations, have shown some telltale signs that some practitioners say are linked with autism.
The goal of Monsanto was to replace all natural seed, to have all global agriculture completely driven by genetically modified seed, and to create a market for the chemicals associated with those genetically modified seed. There was no sense of nature. There was discussion of how to eliminate natural seed.
When I get in discussions with people, they say, well, the government reviewed them, the government's approved them, there were mountains of studies done. They couldn't have gotten it that wrong, and if it was so bad, somebody would speak up about it. But in reality, the few people that have spoken up about it have paid a high personal and professional price for it.
Because of the direct investments of these companies in our universities, new professors know very well that if you expect to get tenure, don't do any negative research on GMOs.
Ultimately, the buck stops at the scientists evaluating. That's me. Then if I agree, then I'm part of the corruption. That's happening. If I don't agree, I get fired. I chose to be fired.
People always ask me, can we reverse the damage from eating a genetically modified diet? Well, mice in an Italian study give us some hope. They were fed genetically modified soy for 8 months and showed damage to their livers, pancreas, and testicles. But when they were put on a non-GM soy diet for the next month, a lot of the problems reversed.
I've had a lot of different patients come in with various stages of chronic disease. That's what I specialize in, sort of these complex cases. And by changing the diet around, changing their nutritional status, a lot of the things that they come in with literally just go away.
There are only 9 genetically modified food crops, but their derivatives are found in over 70% of the foods in the supermarket, particularly the processed foods. There are 4 ways to avoid GMOs. Buy organic, buy products that say non-GMO, buy products listed in our non-GMO shopping guide, or avoid the at-risk ingredients altogether. Principally soy, corn, cottonseed oil, canola oil, and sugar from sugar beets. Most of those crops are genetically engineered. So if it's grown in the US and it doesn't say organic or non-GMO, it's genetically engineered.
The failure to disclose in this, to me, is the real issue. Europe labels these things, Australia labels these things, Asia labels these things, and yet here in the US we've all just been blissfully ignorant. I have a problem with that because it's not in the best interest of my family.
It's hard enough as a mom to have to go in and read every label. Your time's limited, and you really have to be knowledgeable about it. It should have been in there all along. I feel like we were tricked.
These products are on the shelf before you even know they are, and now they're in everything.
I don't want to be a human lab rat, and I certainly don't want my 2-year-old daughter to be a human lab rat.
The GMO labeling issue is on fire in the United States. Bills have been introduced in 19 states, although none have yet gotten past Monsanto's lobbying and influence peddling. In California, we have a real chance of victory because in California, it's a ballot initiative. People vote directly. So we finally have a chance to get what 9 out of 10 Americans have wanted for more than a decade: mandatory labeling of genetically engineered foods.
I have enough questions about this technology to wonder what's happening with us. We have studies that say everything's okay that in the industry, an industry that I don't trust. We have studies by independent doctors that say there are huge questions and that there are problems. There have been no long-term human studies done on this, and I, as a grandmother and a mother, am outraged that our government and that our agencies are not taking care of this for us. They're not protecting us. We have a right to know what we're putting inside of our bodies.
The entire world is looking to California because we can turn it around from this one place. The enormity of the threat is unprecedented in history. All living beings, all future generations. So the enormity of the solution is something that we cannot afford to let slip away.
You know, if you like GMOs, you think they're great, okay, label it. You know, just be proud of it. Buy it, label it, and, you know, but we have a right not to buy it. So, you know, that's our issue. And we're taking that to Washington. You know, we got to bring outside pressure. We got to bring a wake-up call to FDA and, yeah, make our voices heard.
We're taking back the power to the people.
I just want these corrupt governments and corporations to leave my body alone, to leave my family alone, to leave my milk alone, my food alone, my family alone, my community alone. I can take care of myself. The whole world can take care of itself.
How do we get rid of genetically engineered foods? It's much easier than you think. And we don't have to ask the government for a bailout. We can do it ourselves. In Europe, when they achieved the tipping point of consumer rejection at the end of April 1999, within about a week, most major food companies committed to stop using GM ingredients. They had become a marketing liability.
This impacts everything and everyone. It's not just an agriculture issue, it's not just a food industry issue, it's an ever-living creature issue.
It's the most dangerous thing facing human beings in our generation.
It's in our hands. It's right in front of us. It's just a matter of avoiding genetically modified foods and inspiring others to do the same.
My name is Shauna Brady, and I'm the coordinator of our organic garden here at our school. And I was struck as I watched these couple of videos about how, as a young mother, my goal was always to get the most whole foods into my children, a couple of which are here tonight. And now it's disturbing to me that that's not enough. That I need more information, and I need to protect them, so I'm here for them, and I'm here for you, and mostly here to introduce Papa Ed. Gosh, an award-winning man, but what is the most exciting thing to me is the reason that the two of us have come together, which is the common goal of growing an organic garden here on our campus. So I'd like to welcome Papa Ed. Thanks for coming tonight to help educate us.
Thank you. So we'll give you a little background information as to why we do these things at Temple of Beth Shalom. In this era of widespread chemical exposure to children, we have a Living Green program which revolves around why the precautionary principle matters. And precautionary principle resolutions were adopted by both Sarasota County and the city of Sarasota, having concerns relative to the health and safety of its citizens, and advises using precaution when children are around the home when lawn chemicals are used. Now, Temple of Beth Shalom and its schools became the first local institution to adopt the precautionary principle resolution by its board of directors. And its resolution states that Temple of Beth Shalom seeks to constantly eliminate potential hazards to health at the onset of an activity rather than accepting a level of harm, especially where children are involved. So on behalf of the Living Green Committee, I would ask you to think carefully about what we can do, or what you can do with the information we're presenting today. I'm glad to see some of you have scratch pads and pens, and hopefully you will take notes and talk to many other people. Now, regarding myself as a speaker, I'm the founder of a non-for-profit educational charity that promotes environmental awareness and the relationship to health throughout the United States and Canada. And for this type of public service, we've received several environmental leadership awards, which we're proud of. We received the Gulf Guardian Award twice from the EPA, the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We received the State of Florida Environmental Awareness Award, and locally the Environmental Education and Conservation Award for Sarasota County. And last year, I was really very honored to be named one of the Jewish Community Heroes of North America by the National Jewish Federation of North America. So that's enough about me. This is going to tip over. So GMO, it's a complex subject. But first, let me tell you what GMO is not. GMO is not plant breeding. GMO is not cross-pollination of a plant species, which improves the entire plant species and improves agriculture. The crossbreeding within a plant species of taking a gene from a strong plant and putting it into a weak plant is extremely appropriate, and that has helped move agriculture forward. As a matter of fact, the Indians used to do it with corn even before we were around in this continent. So GMO is not plant breeding. It's not cross-pollination. So when discussing genetically modified organisms, or GMO, I have to keep the presentation a little light. The Forrest Gump quote is the most appropriate one I found. You just never know what you're going to get. Because GMOs are not required to be labeled in food products, and they are largely untested for safety for human consumption. And we must change that. So tonight's program is going to be talking about what is GMO food. And the bottom line is, if there are not sufficient unbiased scientific health safety studies of the potential adverse effects of GMO, we have to adopt a precautionary approach, which at least requires GMOs to be labeled as a food additive. So what are GMO food products? GMO foods are genetically modified organisms with specific changes introduced into their DNA by genetic engineering techniques. It's space-age stuff. Typically, genetically modified foods are plant products: wheat, soybean, corn, canola, and cottonseed. And there are some animal products on the shelf, but they have not been introduced or marketed yet. You may have heard about the GE salmon coming. It's a salmon the size of this desk. We really have to avoid these type of frankenfoods getting into the market until they're adequately tested. So GMO, it's the bioscience of splicing genes together from a source organism to provide different attributes into a target organism. For example, GMO corn. GMO corn has a gene from the soil bacterium. It's a bacteria. Bacillus thuringiensis is the name of the bacteria, also known as BT. And BT is inserted into corn. The BT produces a protein which has insecticidal properties, which is toxic to some insects. The insects eat the corn while it's growing, and they are killed by the insecticide. So that sounds like an interesting technology, but the question is it really safe? Unfortunately, we just don't know for sure. We are continuing to depend on scientific uncertainty. And we need scientific certainty to prove GMO technology safe. Not relatively safe, but safe, period. And in many European countries, as you just heard in that brief video, GMO foods have a precautionary approach, which is the law in most European countries. As of today, India has banned GMO foods in their country with a 10-year moratorium. That happened today. but not yet in the United States. So how are they getting away with this? Well, the basic tenets of the GMO biotech industry are that GMO foods are as safe, and this is their favorite phrase, are as safe as their substantially equivalent conventional counterparts. And since they're substantially equivalent, they don't need any safety testing. So the rationale for the argument of substantially equivalent is based on that there's no credible evidence that GMO crops actually do damage the environment or that GMO foods can cause human or animal health. That's what they go by. You can't prove that it damages it. It's substantially equivalent. We don't have to test it for safety. Well, this smoke and mirrors argument falls apart when one applies patent logic. I have 2 patents that I developed. And to get a patent, trust me, you have to produce something new, something novel, something that never existed before. So a genetically modified plant must be novel to be patented. That's why new genes are inserted into the DNA of the plant. However, despite receiving these patents, the biotech industry argues that the GMO modified plant should be considered the same as its parents. And therefore, GMO plants do not need to be safety tested. And the FDA has accepted the argument of substantial equivalence by actually creating a category for GMO foods called, and you can go on the FDA website, it's called GRAS, or generally regarded as safe. If this wasn't so serious, it would be pitifully funny. Generally regarded as safe? Is that good enough for our kids and our grandkids? Generally? So, the biotech industry argues, and we'll talk about dairy towards the end of the presentation, they argue that an artificial bovine growth hormone, RBGH, that a treated cow is substantially equivalent to a normal healthy cow. So they say similarity in composition, well, we don't have to test the milk from the GMO cow because it's similar in milk composition from the untreated cow. It's smoke and mirrors because similarity in composition is only the first step in risk assessment, and any scientist will tell you that. So we argue that similarity in composition is no guarantee that GMO foods are as safe as their conventional counterparts. And quite honestly, the lack of evidence that GMO foods are not safe, it's not proof that it is safe. And indeed, there are a few scientific studies out of Europe published to date which clearly demonstrate adverse effects of GMO foods, but our US regulators have largely ignored these. Now, do you wonder why US regulators have largely ignored the European studies? The agrochemical industry's former executives, their lawyers and scientists, serve in the government agencies that are charged with keeping watch over their industries. Here's 3 examples. Michael Taylor, the former Monsanto lawyer, vice president of public policy, and guess what? He serves at the FDA. He helps to run the Food and Drug Administration. He's got no business being at the FDA if he's a lobbyist for the biotech industry. Islam Siddiqui, he's a former pesticide lobbyist for CropLife America, and he's the lead agricultural negotiator for the US Office of Trade. And Roger Beachy, founding president of the Danforth Plant Science Center, Monsanto's de facto nonprofit research arm. He currently heads the USDA, National Institute for Food and Agriculture. So you've got the FDA, you've got the USDA, and we have problems with the way GMOs are being tested. Who thinks this is a problem? We're taping the video. Let's hear your voices. Yes. So are GMO food safe? The bottom line, we just don't know. Not a good enough answer. But we do know what are GMO foods. So let's talk about what they are. One example of a GMO is what we discussed earlier, the splicing of corn by the Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. Now, BT is a naturally occurring soil-dwelling bacterium, and it's used as a biological alternative to a pesticide. If BT was sprayed on a large crop of corn or soy, or whatever, it's a very appropriate, a wonderful treatment. If it's sprayed on the plant, it will kill the insects. The problem is genetically modified takes that Bt and splices it into the seed of the plant so that when the insects eat the plant, they're killed. That's a problem because you can't wash it off. So everybody get that? A very appropriate biological insecticide is being improperly used. So let's just pause for a second. We have spliced insecticidal properties into corn, which when ingested by insects, they burst open the stomach of insects. But the foods are safe for us. And here we have a bunch of food made from crops that cause insect stomachs to explode, but it's safe for you though. You never know what you're going to get. Forrest Gump's right. So we need to be cautious with corn products, all of them. Fructose corn syrup, everything that's made from corn. Because corn has a gene from the bacteria, Bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis, inserted into it to repel the corn borer beetle. And we must have scientific studies on potential adverse health effects to be completed. Until then, we have to be cautious. If it doesn't have the non-GMO or the organic, really, you shouldn't be buying those products. Oops. And be cautious with GMOs harboring Bacillus thuringiensis, which may cause unintended adverse effects. So Monsanto, when hearing these concerns, claimed that in their research, only insects affected by the Bt toxin would be killed. Only insects would be affected. The Bt toxin, they claimed, would be completely destroyed in the human digestive system, the acid, and it would not have any impact on corn-eating consumers. Oops. A study just proved them so wrong. Doctors at Sherbrooke University Hospital in Quebec, Canada, found the corn's Bt toxin in the blood of pregnant women and their babies, as well as in non-pregnant women. The study has been accepted for publication in the peer-reviewed journal Reproductive Toxicology. So we know now that the Bt toxin in the corn is not killed by the human system, by the human normal digestive system, and it goes into the bloodstream. And we'll see what that means later on. So that's one group of GMOs. Now, the other group of GMOs are foods that have been inserted with a bacterium that provide herbicidal tolerance, tolerance to a herbicide. Herbicides are meant to kill plants. So the great scientists, and they are great scientists, figured out a way to splice in a bacterium which would contain some glyphosate, also called Roundup, where the actual plant being sprayed, if it had this bacterium inserted, would not be killed by the herbicide. So some crops have been genetically engineered to be resistant to glyphosate or Roundup. And soy was the first glyphosate genetically modified crop, and virtually 80% or more of the world's soy crop are all GMO, all genetically modified to be resistant to glyphosate. So I would suggest be cautious towards any GMOs with genes that confer herbicidal tolerance. That is not normal in conventional plants. So let's just pause for a second. Years ago, soy was a nutritional food. Today, GMO soy has a bacteria inserted into it. That's a problem. Secondly, it's sprayed with a herbicide that should kill the soy, but the soy survives the herbicide spraying. So GMO soy has bacteria inserted and absorbs a herbicide that should be killing it, but it lives through it and it absorbs it into its system, and that's not normal in nature. So I'm going to ask you, does that soy sound substantially equivalent to what we used to have as soy? Substantially equivalent? No. It's totally different. So this is some disturbing research. And I'm going to present it just the way it was presented to me, and it's really the reason I'm starting to give these lectures. CREGEN is the Committee for Research and Independent Information on Genetic Engineering. It's an independent, nonprofit organization of scientific counter-expertise to study impacts of GMOs, pesticides, and pollutants on health and the environment. Now, Cregan has recently completed a 2-year feeding study, the first of its kind, on the health effects of rats, which were fed a diet of GMO herbicide-tolerant corn. Maize is the old, I think it's a French word for corn. Okay. So in the research protocol, the researchers studied 10 groups of lab rats. Each group contains 10 males and 10 females over their normal lifetime. 3 groups were given glyphosate herbicide in their drinking water at 3 different levels, consistent with exposure through the food chain from crops which were sprayed with the herbicide. So they were not excessive levels. They're what you would expect to have in your diet if you ate this corn. Then 3 groups were fed diets containing different proportions of the glyphosate herbicide-resistant GMO, and 3 groups were given both herbicide and GMO corn at 3 dosages. 1 control group was untreated and was fed only plain water and conventional diet. You can read this research. It's published in Food and Chemical Toxicology, and it's peer-reviewed, and it's entitled Long-Term Toxicity of a Glyphosate Herbicide and a Glyphosate-Tolerant Genetically Modified Corn. So the research findings by Cregan found that rats fed on a diet containing glyphosate herbicide-tolerant corn or given water containing glyphosate herbicide at levels permitted in drinking water and found in GMO crops, developed mammary tumors at significant greater levels than the untreated control. Now, Cregan member Dr. Michael Antonio, he's a molecular biologist and gene expert at King's College in London, and he comments on the study, both of the research and protocol and the results. And the pictures of the rats with these large tumors is very disturbing, but that's what these rats looked like after 2 years of being fed the same corn that is available in our supermarkets. So Dr. Antonio says, quote, "This is as good an indicator as we can expect that the consumption of GMO maize and the herbicide glyphosate to seriously impact human health." I'm letting the picture of these rats sink in. This is the first long-term feeding study on GMOs that's ever been done. So the Cregan research findings raise very serious question about the current regulatory process in the United States for licensing industrial chemicals. The Cregan scientists observe that all GMO crops in the US have been improved safe for consumption on the basis of only a 3-month animal feeding trial, whereas in the study, the majority of cancers were only detectable after 18 months. So, as expected based on its culture, whenever negative research on GMO has been published, Monsanto, the primary biotech company, has attacked the scientists, stating that the researchers used tumor-prone rats. First, before I go on, that is such a spurious statement, because we have human beings who are tumor-prone, more vulnerable, more susceptible to getting cancer. So that statement, first of all, is totally inappropriate. But let's say that the researchers did use tumor-prone rats. We should not ignore the key point about the Cregan tumor findings is that there are statistically significant increased tumor rates in the treated groups as compared to the untreated control. So the answer is for Monsanto to agree to provide new safety data to confirm or dispute the results. Not to say it's an inappropriate study. Do a 2-year study with impartial scientists, and if they're right, you have to withdraw the products. If they're wrong, just keep doing what you're doing. But for the benefit of public health safety, you would think they would take these results a little more serious. So here's the research. Make up your own mind. Let me read it to you. This is direct quote from the study. Up to 14 months, no animals in the control group. Control group means basically water and no GMO corn. no animals in the control group showed any sign of tumors, while up to 30% of the females in the treated group did develop tumors. So you have 0 to 30%. By the 24-month, at the end of the study, the end of the 2 years, up to 80% of treated female animals had developed tumors in all the GMO and glyphosate treated groups, while only 30% of controls were affected. Now, 30% is still quite a lot of tumors to be affected in these animals. But the difference between 30% in the control group and 80% in the treated group, it's 2.5 times. That is scientifically statistical, and it's worthy of some really important work. We haven't seen this on CNN. We haven't heard a word of this on NBC News, but the study is very important. So, in my opinion, the responsibility now lies with Monsanto to pay for a full 2-year study of its GMO maize, its corn, and the herbicide, and have it carried out not by industry or its contracted labs, but by independent scientists commissioned by a publicly funded body consisting of a wide range of stakeholders representing the public interest. And in the meantime, all GMO crops should be, as was done today in India, subjected to a long-term safety study by the FDA and withdrawn from the market. So we're not going to have time for question and answers at the end of this presentation. Anybody have a comment or a question on this portion of plants, GMOs, herbicide tolerant, insecticidal, or BT tolerant? Any questions? Good. Glad it's sinking in. But
if you buy organic soy milk, is that different than the soy that?
Well, judging from what I've read, I don't believe there's an organic soy product available. I mean, you contact the company.
That's non-GMO.
If it says non-GMO and organic, then contact the company, and if that's what they tell you, like we've done that, then that would be safe to purchase, yes. But it has to say non-GMO. What this study has done.
Organic isn't good enough, just organic.
Well, not with this research, no, because you get the crossover.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Has it been established that the GMO has to be indicated if it is a GMO product?
No, that's the whole discussion.
It hasn't been established.
You mean labeled in the food?
Yes.
No, we want to get it labeled. That's the next step. Not in our country. Okay, but like Forrest Gump would say if he was here, that's not all we have to say about that. Because now we have to talk about the basic alterations of some of our favorite foods, dairy and meat. So, bovine growth hormone, or BGH, this is a hormone naturally produced in dairy cattle. But since 1994, the same company, Monsanto, found it possible to synthesize a recombinant or artificial or synthetic growth hormone. It's called RBGH. Now, the practice is already prohibited in Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, 27 countries of the European Union, but in the United States, we have some public opinion. It's caused a number of products and retailers to insist on hormone-free or RBST-free. But here's why it's important. The European Scientific Commission found that RBGH use resulted in more infections in the dairy cattle, and that the farmers, as a result, had to use more antibiotics to combat the infections, and that the residues of both the hormones and the antibiotics possibly could end up in milk and dairy products. So we have to be cautious with dairy and beef products from cattle which have been fed with hormones to increase milk production. So now, like we did with soy and like we did with corn, let's pause for a second. Years ago, milk and dairy were nutritional foods. Today's milk may contain both a synthetic bovine hormone that would stimulate the cow to produce more milk, and then antibiotics to counter infections and the infections which can be pus-driven. So you could end up with dairy with pus from the animal, a lot of antibiotics, a lot of artificial hormones. So here's the question. Does that milk sound substantially equivalent to the milk of our parents or grandparents? Is it substantially equivalent? What do you think? So I'm sorry, I forgot to advance the slides. Well, scientists and researchers around the world are catching on, and they're starting to investigate the link between food and disease. Here are 3 examples of the developing science, based all on the prevention or the precautionary principle. First, the President's Cancer Panel report was published in 2010 by the U.S. National Cancer Institute. That's not an environmental wild green group. That's the U.S. National Cancer Institute, and the title of their report is Reducing Environmental Cancer Risk. And the scientists in the executive summary state, we do not know how much environmental exposures influence endocrine dysfunction during what they call key windows of vulnerability, such as the prenatal period, childhood, and puberty. But the scientists state in a great many instances, when it comes to food and diet and chemicals, we know enough to act now. And then what about autoimmune disease? TEDDY, T-E-D-D-Y, is the acronym for the environmental determination of diabetes in the young. And in the TEDDY study, investigators will center on, guess what? The introduction of certain foods, such as cow's milk and cereal, to determine if dietary factors could be a trigger. A trigger means the initiation for the development of type 1 diabetes. And the further question is, have GMOs been studied to have been proven to have no adverse effect in autoimmune disorders? And the answer is, not yet. Now, we do have an agency that's on our side, and it's the US EPA. So when you hear a politician talk about shutting down the EPA, don't vote for him. Because the EPA is working hard with a group of scientists on endocrine disrupting chemicals. The US EPA has identified a list of 134 chemicals that they're going to screen for their potential to disrupt the endocrine system. And this is part of EPA's strategic plan, where it intends to enhance its ability, thank God we have the EPA, to measure the effects of chemicals and pesticides on human health, focusing on pesticide risk reduction on sensitive subpopulation like children. And glyphosate herbicide, as used in GMO, is one of the chemicals listed for Tier 1 screening in the EDSP, Endocrine Disruption Screening Program. This is worthwhile writing down this particular website and reading yourself all these lists of chemicals. Make sure that they are not in cleaning products as a long list of them. Make sure they're not used in pesticides or herbicides around children. But it's www.epa.gov/endo. And you can find the EPA study and the work they're doing online. So, if a food was produced using genetic engineering, it should say so on the label. You are right. And we have to demand, as citizens, that at least non-GMO foods can be labeled as non-GMO by the FDA and the Consumer Protection Agency. And this starts with you all becoming activists. At your next purchase at the grocery store, pick up a package, ask for the manager, and ask for, is this non-GMO? Ask for the labeling of non-GMO. That's how it'll start. Whether it's Whole Foods or Publix, it doesn't matter where you're buying your groceries, ask for non-GMO. You'll be surprised how fast it will happen if everybody asks for non-GMO. And by the way, when was the last time you saw a big sign in the supermarket saying, now containing GMO, special offer? Have you ever seen it? You're buying this by accident. Have you ever seen a sign? Containing GMO, special offer, introducing GMO. You've never seen it. Yeah, I mean, we need to get the stuff labeled, but quite frankly, if you're not seeing it as a marketing advantage right now, it's because they're worried that it could be a marketing disadvantage. So start asking for non-GMO foods. Start tomorrow and make noise about it. Where's the manager? I want non-GMO. I just heard a talk. I just heard about a scientific study. Okay. So the controversy is that the GMO companies don't want the products labeled as non-GMO because they think you'll buy that product and not theirs, and they're right. So basically, the United States Court of Appeal in the Sixth Circuit just ruled in favor of the Organic Trade Association in a landmark case that would have prevented consumers in Ohio from knowing if dairy was not GMO. This is the precedent that consumers do have a right to know if dairy was produced without growth hormones. They won't put on their food that it contains GMO, but the dairies who are producing milk without GMOs, we want them to be able to say legally, not GMO, and then you'll have a choice. Now, Proposition 37, the California ballot initiative, our right to know, their right to know. We hope that in 2014, the groups that I've joined who are very active, there are talks like this going all over Florida today and tomorrow. By 2014, it's our hope to have a ballot initiative in Florida. So California goes to vote on November 6th. We hope it'll pass. But whether it does or it doesn't, we need to get a ballot initiative in Florida and keep the pressure on. And just label it. Why not? Anyway, what are the chemical companies afraid of? Cookie Monster's still going to want his cookies, but he'll want a non-GMO cookie. Now, if you want to help in the next crucial few weeks on Prop 37, it won't cost you a thing on long-distance calls. If you will go online, organicconsumerassociation.org, and do what I did, donate your time to help them on the phone banks to call undecided California voters to vote yes on Proposition 37 to label GMOs. We've got about 2 weeks left. You can help, each of you. You can make 10 calls or 20 calls. They'll give you numbers to call. You can call from your home, and essentially, there's no cost to you. It's just your time. But that will help a lot. Yeah, it's all one word, organicconsumerassociation.org. So maybe 20 people in this room. If you all call 10 or 15 people a day, it can add up. Because if we don't get GMO labeled, and again, Forrest Gump's on the money, stupid is as stupid does. We've got to get this labeled, especially with what we know now. And if the answer from the FDA and the food industry is that we decline to properly label GMO as an ingredient, then we got to listen to Howard Beale. Remember him from Network? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. Write to the FDA. Copy your elected officials, your senators and your congressmen and your Florida senators and representatives in the House, and demand to continue the labeling of non-GMO. We're not going to be able to step and get GMO labeled, but continue the labeling of non-GMO as your right. So if you write to the FDA and your congressman, here's some bullet points. You want long-term human clinical trials of the potential adverse effects of GMO foods to replace grass, generally regarded as safe. What a joke. And you want scientific studies on diet as a prevention of chronic autoimmune disease. You will not be alone. The Organic Consumer Association, I just told you their website, is delivering a petition backed by 200,000 consumers calling on President Obama to require labeling. And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, received more than 1.2 million comments supporting the Center for Food Safety legal petition filed last year, which seeks mandatory labeling for GMO foods, the most comments ever filed on an FDA proposal. And the most significant of all, from 828 world scientists, members of the Institute of Science and Society, ISIS. They have sent an open letter to all governments concerning genetically modified organisms. And these 828 scientists write, The hazards of GMO to biodiversity and human and animal health are now acknowledged by sources within the United Kingdom and US governments. We urge the US Congress to reject GMO crops as both hazardous and contrary to the interest of family farmers, and to support research and development of sustainable agricultural methods that can truly benefit family farmers all over the world. And we, the undersigned scientists, call for the immediate suspension of all environmental releases of GMO crops and products, both commercially and in open field trials, for at least 5 years, and for patents on living processes, organisms, seeds, cell lines, and genes to be revoked and banned, and for a comprehensive public inquiry into the future of agriculture and food security for all. Well, let's see who these nobodies from the world of science are. We have 828 scientists, include a mathematical ecologist from the University of Minnesota, a biologist ecologist from Rutgers University, a geneticist from Harvard University, a molecular biologist from MIT, and the director of Woods Hole Research Center, and the list goes on. So please support this agenda. We need to prove GMO food safe. We need these long-term human clinical trials. We need the FDA to support the labeling of non-GMO foods. The most important thing you can do after tonight is continue to get educated on GMO. Here's some books, Seeds of Deception and Genetic Roulette, both written by Jeffrey Smith, who is the architect of that first 10-minute film. You're going to see the documentary film now, The World According to Monsanto. There's another very good film called The Future of Food. There are internet sites on GMO. There's the Institute for Responsible Technology and the Center for Food Safety. Don't forget the EPA and their endocrine disrupting screening program. We have a website at APP, Advocating Precautionary Principle. There's over 300 articles published there so far, and that's open to the public. You just type in APP, Precautionary Principle, all one word, .wordpress.com. Remember the Organic Consumers Association in California and the help they need. And there's an iPhone app, it's free. It's called the Non-GMO. You got it?
Yes.
Good, free.
It's free.
Good. That's the beginning. And you can use that information as you go shopping and, you know, ask for non-GMO. So, I really must have liked that movie. He's all over this presentation. Well, thank you for your attention. Now, as you watch the documentary film called The World According to Monsanto, is a French film, you can decide if you should be comfortable with accepting a company with the history of Monsanto controlling our food supply and telling us GMO is safe and just trust us. So that's what you're going to decide watching that movie. And that's why the precautionary principle matters. Thank you very much.